Imagine that one day you find yourself face to face with the most beautiful woman in the entire county. But that same woman is also the proudest, the wildest, and the hardest to reach. That is why, in front of everyone, she decides to humiliate you and mock you as a man. To do it, she gives you a challenge that sounds like a death sentence. If you manage to tame that horse, she says, I will carry your son myself. Do you accept the challenge? Many had tried to break that demonic horse, but every one of them had failed. When the beautiful Nora thought Ethan Ryder would turn around and leave, the man raised his eyes and answered with a calmness that froze the blood of everyone there. No problem. I accept. That foolish Yankee is already a dead man, some whispered. Poor miserable soul, others said. But then someone added in a firm voice. If the white man wins, I will make sure you keep your word. Do you understand? What would you have done? Would you have walked away with your head down, or would you have accepted the game? Welcome once again to OZ Radio, stories that carry you away. Listen carefully until the end, because today you will discover what happens when the wounded pride of a woman comes face to face with the unbreakable word of a true man of the plains. It all began one afternoon when a cowboy rode through the gates of a distant settlement built in a place known as Spirit Canyon. It was a harsh land, inhabited mostly by Native Americans, men and women used to sun, dust, and hard decisions. The cowboy's name was Ethan Ryder. His appearance was simple. His head had been faded by the desert sun, and his hands carried scars from rope, barbed wire, and years of heavy work. He did not wear silver spurs, and he did not show off a shiny revolver at his waist. He walked without hurry and without arrogance. He seemed to carry a strange patience, the kind of ancient patience that is born only after surviving too much. In the main corral of the community, the ground trembled. Inside stood Veridic, a huge black stallion with bloodshot eyes and a back marked by old whip scars. He was the brutal result of men who had tried to break him by force. For that animal to kill someone was not a distant possibility. It was almost inevitable. That was where his name came from. The real question was whether there was still anyone foolish enough, or ignorant enough, to try to ride him. That horse already had a history. For that reason, the men of the settlement believed Nora only wanted to remain alone and entertain herself by watching men take a direct blow to their pride before going to meet St. Peter. The horse snorted, struck his hooves against the logs of the corral, and beat the air. To the people, that animal was a monster. But Ethan Ryder looked at him with different eyes. The cowboy stopped, dismounted with slow movements, and rested his arms on the wooden fence. He adjusted his hat and remained there, watching the stallion. There was no fear in his eyes. Only patience. A patience as old as the mountains surrounding that place. But Ethan was not the only one watching Veridic. From the shadow of the shed, a figure appeared. It was Nora, the daughter of the community chief. Nora was not an ordinary woman. She had a straight back, eyes sharp as an arrowhead, and the pride of someone who had learned to defend herself alone. In a land of hard men, she was tired of arrogant strangers who came to her canyon promising wonders only to build a reputation or look at her as if she were a hunting trophy. Nora approached Ethan and stopped less than a yard away from him. She crossed her arms and looked him up and down. Another white man who thinks he can do what the man here could not, she said in a cold voice, cutting like the northern wind. Go back where you came from, cowboy. That animal has already killed 2 men. We do not need you leaving your bones in our dust. Ethan did not even move. He did not look at her with arrogance, and he did not try to defend his name. He only turned his head slowly, held the burning gaze of that woman for a moment, and then looked back at the stallion. That silence enraged Nora. Her pride felt insulted by the calmness of that man. She wanted to scare him. She wanted to see fear on his face and force him to get on his horse and leave forever. So she raised her voice loudly enough for all the tribal men standing nearby to hear her. And there, in front of everyone, she pronounced her own judgment, a sacred and dangerous challenge. I like your horse. It looks strong, well cared for, and noble. Let us make a deal, stranger. If you are as much of a man as your silence pretends to say, go in there. If you manage to put a rope on Veridic and tame him without breaking his spirit, I myself will honor an ancient law of my people. I will carry your child in my womb and give you a family. But if you lose, you will leave on foot, penniless and without pride. The men of the settlement held their breath. It was an enormous challenge. Nora smiled faintly at the corner of her lips, certain that the cowboy would step back under the weight of such a promise. Ethan remained silent for 3 seconds. From the far end of the corral, the horse neighed with fury. Then the cowboy slowly unbuckled the belt that held his revolver, carefully hung it on a wooden post, looked straight into Nora's eyes, and answered in a deep voice that did not tremble even slightly. Deal. Bring the rope, woman. Nora snapped her fingers. One of her men quickly approached and handed the cowboy a cord rope. Ethan took it calmly, looked at Nora again, and then focused once more on the condemned horse. The entire crowd leaned forward. They expected the cowboy to open the gate, spin the lasso in the air, and charge at the beast. But Ethan did not move. With a calmness that almost seemed insolent, he walked to the main post, placed the cord rope beside the revolver, and crossed his arms. He looked one last time at Nora, then at the stallion, and simply sat down in the dust, turning his back to the spectators. He was not going to fight that horse. He was going to defeat him with patience. A murmur of disappointment and surprise moved through the tribe. No one understood anything. Finally, someone in the crowd, watching with crossed arms, broke the silence with irritation. How long is this going to last? Are you just going to sit there and stare at him? This Yankee is completely crazy. Without turning his head, Ethan lifted one finger with an almost fatherly gesture. His calmness drove everyone to frustration. Shoot, he said quietly. The young lady said nothing about time. This will take as long as it needs to take. And he stayed there, sitting motionless. The sun began to set, painting the canyon with long shadows. The men of the settlement left one by one, laughing at the cowboy. But there was something no one noticed except Nora, who watched from a distance. The breathing of the beast began to change. The stallion stopped snorting so violently. His ears, once tense, began to relax. That very same day, before the cowboy had moved even an inch from his place, Veridic lowered his head, closed his eyes, and fell asleep at the other end of the corral. The monster had found peace in the same space where his supposed enemies stood. During the first week, there were no ropes, no shouting, and no spurs. An entire week passed. The people of Spirit Canyon gathered every evening expecting to see a bloody spectacle, but Ethan gave them something they did not understand: silence. Every dawn, the cowboy entered the corral. He took a few steps and sat directly in the dust, leaning his back against one of the posts. He carried nothing in his hands. Veridic greeted him as always, with burning eyes, ears pinned to his skull, and hooves striking the ground so hard they raised clouds of dust that partly covered Ethan. The animal snapped his teeth only inches from his face. But Ethan did not even blink. He knew that if he showed even a drop of fear, the horse would win. And if he answered with aggression, the horse would kill him. As the days passed, the people grew bored. They said the stranger was a clown who only knew how to sit and waste time. Everyone left. Everyone except Nora. From the dimness of the old shed, she did not take her eyes off him. Her pride remained untouched, but curiosity began to take the place of contempt. She was used to seeing men enter the corral to prove, with blows, who was in charge. Seeing Ethan there, motionless beneath the burning sun, with his skin scraped by the earth, not even trying to touch the horse, confused her completely. She wanted to see action. But all that passed was time. Nothing more. At least, that was how it seemed at first. By the second week, physical exhaustion was visible on Ethan's face. His lips were cracked by the desert salt, his shirt was covered in dust, and his eyes were tired. But one thing was obvious, the atmosphere inside the corral had changed. Veridic no longer wasted strength striking the wood. Now he walked in circles, studying the man. In the middle of that week, the first turning point came. The sun had barely appeared above the canyon ridges, painting the earth a cold red. Veridic stopped, snorted loudly, stretched his neck, and took 3 steps toward Ethan. With careful slowness, Ethan lifted his hand from his knee and extended it with the palm facing upward. The stallion tensed. The air inside the corral seemed to freeze. But the scent of honest sweat and the absolute stillness of the cowboy overcame the ancient fear of the beast. Veridic's enormous black head slowly lowered until his lips touched Ethan's fingers. A long breath came from the horse's chest. At that moment, he accepted contact. Nora, hidden behind the logs, felt something turn over inside her. No man in the entire territory had ever made that monster lower his head. Ethan had done it without a single whip strike, without a single shout. By the 3rd week, Ethan began to speak. He did not speak to the tribe, and he did not try to make others hear him. He spoke to Veridic in low, almost invisible whispers while running his fingers across the horse's forehead with strange tenderness. But in the silence of Spirit Canyon, words traveled far. Still, what came from Ethan's lips remained a mystery to everyone, especially to the chief's daughter. Watching that demonic horse approach the cowboy while the man barely moved his lips, with no one able to understand him, drove her mad. Every evening, Nora moved a little closer, hiding among the shadows to hear what the man was saying. And what she heard disarmed her completely. "I know what they did to you, friend," Ethan whispered, stroking the scarred neck. "They beat you to make you bend your knees. They locked you away because they feared your strength. That is why you bite. That is why you kick. Because you think everyone comes to take something from you." Ethan slowly stood and rested his forehead against the animal's shoulder. Veridic remained completely still, absorbing the warmth of that man. Then Ethan continued in a low voice, carrying the bitterness of old pain. "When we are hurt too deeply, we build walls. We become wild so no one can come close and see the wounds. We strike first so no one strikes us. But anger, my friend, anger is tiring. Anger dries the soul from the inside." Those words crossed the corral and struck directly into Nora's chest. She felt that Ethan was not speaking only about the horse. He was describing her. She was the one who had built a wall of pride and contempt to protect herself from the men of the settlement, men who looked at her like a trophy. She was the one who attacked first with her sharp tongue because she was afraid of appearing vulnerable. For the first time in her life, Nora felt that a man was looking at her not with the desire to possess her, but with understanding for her pain, even without touching her. And then the icy shield of that woman began to crack. Beneath the dust of that corral, she no longer felt so protected. At the end of the 3rd week, the sky over Spirit Canyon dressed itself in black. A desert storm fell over the county with gusts of freezing wind, lifting sand, and with sheets of rain that struck like stones. That night, Ethan did not seek shelter. He remained by the fence of the corral, with an old canvas over his shoulders, watching so the lightning would not frighten Veridic too much. The horse moved from side to side, disturbed by the thunder, but always looked toward the edge of the corral where the cowboy's silhouette remained steady like a lighthouse in the darkness. Suddenly, through the mud and rain, Nora appeared. She carried a thick wool blanket over her head, completely soaked. She should not have been there, but her thoughts had not allowed her to sleep. She stopped in front of Ethan, on the other side of the logs. Water ran down her cheeks, but her eyes still burned with that untamed fire. Perhaps to hide her words behind the veil offered by the storm, she decided to speak to the cowboy. "Why are you still here?" Nora shouted. "You already got what you wanted. You made the horse touch your hand. You already proved yourself. What else are you looking for? Do you want to humiliate me in front of my people, or do you only want to claim your prize?" Ethan did not answer immediately. He adjusted the brim of his hat, let the water run down his face, and looked at her with that calmness that always disarmed her. "I am not trying to humiliate anyone, Senorita," Ethan said in a low voice that cut through the storm. "I am only keeping my word. You made the rules. You do not understand," Nora cried. For the first time, her voice did not sound full of hatred, but full of deep despair. "That wager was meant to make you leave. White men come here thinking everything has a price. The men of my own people look at me like a trophy to be conquered so they can prove they are worthy of leading. I have to be strong. I have to be stone for all of them. I am a symbol, not a woman." The rain seemed to soften for a second, leaving a thick silence between them. Nora breathed heavily, regretting that she had let out the pain she had kept hidden for years. She expected the cowboy to laugh. But Ethan did something else. He stepped forward until he was only inches from her, separated only by the wood of the corral. He removed his hat and allowed the rain to soak his hair so she could see his eyes clearly. "I do not see a trophy, Miss Nora," he said, calling her by her name for the first time. "I have spent half my life taming animals and learning people. I know how to tell when someone fights because they are cruel, and when someone fights because they are wounded." Ethan slowly lifted his hand with the same respect and patience with which he had approached the stallion weeks earlier. He did not try to embrace her, and he did not allow himself any unnecessary gesture. He simply placed his open palm on the log, offering it to her. "You only wanted to protect yourself so you would not be hurt. I understand that. The world is full of men who want to possess beautiful things instead of protecting them. But I did not enter that corral for a golden prize, and I did not enter it to win a woman and show her off in my saddle. I entered because I saw a horse that needed help. And because I saw you. I do not want to tame you too. But I can listen to you. I am good at that." Nora froze. Ethan's words entered her more deeply than the cold of the storm. She looked at the cowboy's hand, a rough hand hardened by heavy work, but extended with an honesty she had never known. Slowly, she slipped her hand out from beneath the blanket and placed her fingers over Ethan's. It was a brief touch, wet and warm beneath the rain. But in that tiny moment, all the tension that had gathered for weeks changed into something else. The wall of pride collapsed. This was no longer a duel between a stranger and a proud woman. It was the birth of a true bond between two souls that had recognized each other in the middle of the storm. Behind them, Veridic released a soft breath, as if silently approving the pact that had just been made in the darkness. At last, the 4 weeks came to an end. The morning was clear. Golden sunlight washed over the corral of Spirit Canyon. The entire town was there. No one wanted to miss the ending. The tribal elders watched in silence, while the young people crowded near the logs of the fence. The news had spread. This would be the day of the final test. In the front row, leaning against a post with a mocking smile, stood Clayton Hayes. Clayton was the best rider in the county, an arrogant and greedy man who had always wanted to take possession of the canyon lands and, above all, find a way to claim the beautiful Nora. He had seen other men fail, and he was certain that this day he would witness the stranger's funeral. "I hope you have a good doctor, Yankee," Clayton shouted loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Because that cursed beast will break your ribs before you touch the stirrup. And when you fall, I will go in myself to finish the job and claim the prize." Nora, standing beside her father, clenched her fists. Her eyes met Ethan's. In them, there was no longer contempt. There was a silent plea and fear for the life of the man who had listened to her beneath the storm. Ethan did not look at Clayton. He did not waste even a drop of energy answering the insult. With a calm step, he approached the fence where his revolver and the cord rope Nora had given him on the first day were lying. He took the rope, opened the heavy wooden gate, and entered the corral alone. The gate closed behind him with a dry, loud blow. The corral became a sanctuary of silence. Veridic tensed when he saw the crowd. He snorted, raised dust with his hoofs, and remembered the pain of old times. But Ethan moved in a straight line, shoulders relaxed, the rope hanging from his hand. "Easy, friend," Ethan whispered with that fatherly voice the stallion already knew. "Only you and me. You already know who I am." The horse fixed his eyes on the cowboy. The air seemed to stop moving. Ethan approached inch by inch until he stood shoulder to shoulder with the beast. With a tenderness that seemed impossible in such hardened hands, he slipped the rope around the horse's neck, forming a simple, improvised bridle. There were no pulls. There was no violence. Then Ethan placed his left hand on the horse's withers, lifted his foot as if there were an invisible stirrup, and with one clean, smooth, precise movement, climbed onto Veridic's back. The people froze. Clayton took one step forward, waiting for the first explosion, the wild leap that would throw the stranger into the dirt. The horse shook for a second, confused by the weight on his back. His muscles hardened like iron. But Ethan did not use spurs. He held firmly with his legs, released a long breath, and stroked that powerful back, black as night. And then the miracle happened before the eyes of the entire canyon. Veridic did not leap. He did not try to bite. Instead, he released a snort of relief and began to trot. It was an elegant trot, steady and perfectly controlled. They made a full circle around the corral, the cowboy and the untamable horse, moving as if they had been born to be together, cutting through the wind with a harmony no one on that land had ever seen. Everyone kept watching. That horse seemed like another creature. No one could believe they were looking at the same animal that had recently killed two of the bravest riders in the settlement. When they returned to the center of the corral, right in front of the place where Nora and the tribe watched as if turned to stone, Ethan gently pulled the rope. The horse stopped. Then, defying every rule of wild nature, the enormous black stallion bent his front legs, knelt in the dirt, and lowered his head in a sign of willing submission and absolute respect for his rider. The silence in Spirit Canyon was louder than thunder. No one applauded. It was too beautiful. The astonishment was too great to become noise. Clayton was the first who wanted to break and ruin that moment. But he could not. He stood with his mouth open, his face pale, and his pride trampled into the dust, realizing that he had been completely defeated by the greatness of a true man. Clayton turned around, mounted his horse, and rode away without looking back. Ethan climbed down from the stallion with the same calmness with which he had entered on the first day. He removed the rope from Veridic's neck and walked toward the fence. The horse moved away without the slightest resistance. The challenge had been fully completed before everyone present. Ethan crossed the threshold of the corral, picked up his belt, his lasso, and his revolver, and slowly fastened everything at his waist. Murmurs began to rise as everyone tried to understand the miracle they had just witnessed. Nora's father stepped forward and nodded his head, offering a respect that very few white men had ever earned in that canyon. But Ethan was searching for only one gaze. And he found it. Nora separated herself from the group. She walked slowly toward him, without the blanket that had hidden her face the night before and, above all, without the armor of arrogance she had worn for years. She stopped in front of the cowboy and breathed deeply. Her entire people were watching. Everyone knew that the ancient law of the tribe bound her to her own words. The time had come to keep the promise made to the cowboy. Would she do it? Or would she try to escape? She had spoken that oath with complete firmness. And in that settlement, a person's word was sacred. At first, she had believed that this man would not even accept the challenge. But now, behind her, stood her father, the highest authority, not only to support her, but also to ensure that the agreement would be fulfilled exactly. Nora looked at her people. Then she fixed her eyes on Ethan and spoke in a clear voice, a voice that did not tremble, but this time came from the deepest part of her soul. 4 weeks ago, I threw a promise like a weapon, Nora said, without taking her eyes off the cowboy. I wanted to push you away. But today, I repeat that same promise before my ancestors and before my people, not with wounded pride, but with clear eyes and an open heart. Nora took one more step, closing the distance between them. For the first time, a soft and sincere smile touched her lips. If you want me by your side, Ethan, I will honor the law myself. I will carry your child in my womb and build a life with you. Not because you won a wager in the dust, but because you are the only man who managed to see who I am behind my walls. I choose you, if you will accept me. Ethan looked at her in silence. There was no trace of a victor's pride on his face. Only immense tenderness. He removed his hat, extended his rough hand, and took Nora's hand with surprising gentleness. I did not win a wager, Nora, Ethan whispered. I found my companion. Spirit Canyon seemed to bless that union with a gentle breeze. At the far end of the corral, Veridic gave a soft neigh, as if saying farewell to years of cruelty and welcoming a new story. And so, the man of the plains and the untamable woman cross a hard and hostile land to find the purest kind of love. The story we have just heard contains several elements inspired by real history. In the Old West, there truly were women who held great power among their people, and some of them became very well known. One of them was Pine Leaf, a woman leader of the Crow tribe. It is said that when men tried to win her favor, she set before them an almost impossible test if they wished to become the companion of a chief. They had to go into battle and bring her twice as many horses or enemy scalps as she herself had won in combat. Since no one could surpass those war trials, Pine Leaf remained unmarried. In truth, she never wanted to tie her life to anyone. But she gained great wealth and became the third most powerful leader in the council of her people. And that is how it is, my friends. Here at Ozek Radio, memorable stories are also born in the lands of the Old West without the thunder of revolver shots. Sometimes, we are also like Nora. We build giant walls of pride, coldness, and indifference because the world has struck us too hard. We believe the only way to survive is to trust no one. We use sharp words to push people away because, deep inside, we are afraid they might hurt us. But there are people with true authority, people who do not look down on others. They do not need to brag about what they know or prove anything with noise. They are like Ethan Ryder, who sat in the dust and waited while everyone laughed at him. So I ask you, what would you have done in Ethan's place? Would you have had the patience to wait 4 weeks in the dust for a promise born from pride? Leave your opinion down below in the comments of this video. I read absolutely all of them. Thank you for joining us for one more night on the other side of the receiver. This was OZ Radio, the place where stories come alive. See you in the next episode. Take care of yourselves. And until next time.